Okay, is this on? Can you hear? Hi everyone, I'm Patty Solis Doyle and I have the privilege of moderating this illustrative panel, but also the last panel of the day. I want to thank our panelists for generously taking time out of their very busy schedules to join us. I want to set up a little bit the last panel. We're going to have a conversation for about 25 minutes, and then we're going to take questions from the audience, and then you're all going to rise and applaud, everyone. I guess I want to start with what is a pretty broad question, but I think an important one. I was really riveted by the previous conversation, but we're going from great wealth to public service. Our panelists of public servants. I think public service is a great and noble thing, and I think everyone should spend at least a part of their career doing it. But unfortunately, we're seeing fewer and fewer young people wanting to get into public service for any number of reasons, you know, probably the crazy political divide that we're living in. And also, while we've made strides in our numbers for Latinos, we're not where we should be, not in public service, not in elected office. So my first question is a two-part question. One is, what drew you to public service? And then how do we get more Latinos and Latinas involved? And I'm going to start with you, Robert.
Okay. So I'm going to draw some parallels to the previous panel, because I think there's a number of things that are similar. Certainly not the financial reward at the end of the path, but you do have similar things that have to happen. Like for me personally, what drew me in there was the sense of what was possible. So again, going back to family, my father was an elected official, one of the youngest council members in New York City, and my mom was a school administrator. But they were heavily involved in school reform in the 80s and believed that children who are black or brown could succeed in this New York City school system if they had educators and principals who looked like them guiding their schools, right? So that was a social experiment that they were involved in, that I saw success result from that. Now, going back to success and failures in public life and elected life, there are plenty of them. You know, you win elections and you lose them along the way. So seeing that, I never thought I would be involved in politics, and instead chose finance, right, as another one. But somewhere deep back there, you saw what was possible, and that's the power of mentorship, examples, and what we need to do to really light the fire of possibility amongst our younger generation. And then the next thing is risk-taking, because as elected officials, we are taking on risk. We're basically betting on ourselves, and every time we go out there and present ourselves. But it's that same drive, that what kind of change can I make in my community? What is the problem that is pushing me to that tipping point where I need to be involved, and it's not something that can be delegated, it's not something that I can expect that someone else is going to do it for us, because every time we do that, we end up waiting and being impatient and not being served. And for me, it was public housing. You know, I represented East Harlem for a very long time, the most public housing in the United States in any one particular area, and the conditions have fallen apart. And that pathway to success, that was what my grandparents did to be able to get, you know, their next generation into elected office and then their next generation into Yale and Ivy League, was closing for too many people. So that's what brought me into eventually dipping into public service. But you know, the drive happens, you know, when you see something that makes you want to have that social change and that social impact. And then one of the things that is how do you put that drive and that desire to risk take into action? And I think that's another area where certainly younger Latinos have to feel and see that there is a connection to a network, be it an alumni society, be it a council of urban professionals, someone who will train them, New America Alliance, somebody who will train them to be able to take this room, their risk, their desire, their mission, and turn it into action on the ground. And for me, it's mentors and relationships like that were cultivated as early as 2005, you know, when some people saw in me and thought about the need to create these mentorships and opportunities that allowed for the space to take those risks in public office later.
Jorge?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say that it's an honor to share the panel with the group, and it's great to be here with everyone. I appreciate the invitation. So, you know, I never thought that I would run for office, and to be honest, I always swore off that I would ever run for office. I wanted nothing to do with it. But there are really two things that drew me into it. You know, first, you know, I had a formative experience as a child. As a child, I had a childish mentality in that, you know, things just kind of happen on their own. And I remember being maybe 7 or 8 years old and seeing the connection that, you know, if I did certain things or said certain things, they actually had real outcomes in the world, this sort of sense of agency in my own life. And I've always been fascinated by that we can actually make a difference in the world around us. And for me, it's always given me a deep sense of purpose to feel that I'm connected to something bigger than myself. And so what drew me to public office was the ability to make a difference. And that's exciting every day of work. That's one. The second thing that draws me into this is it's just the way that I'm built. I'm hyper competitive. In my own way, I try not to be obnoxious about it. But you know, I'm always up for a challenge. And I think that we all go through different stages in our lives. And you know, I have gone through a stage in my life too where, you know, I'm very competitive, but more than anything, sort of I'm trying to prove to myself that I can. You know, and I constantly take on a new and different challenge. And so, you know, after I felt comfortable with my professional success, I wanted to take on another challenge. And, you know, it was a time of transition in the city and folks were approaching me. And part of my jumping into this was I wanted to prove to myself that I can do it and along the way make a great deal of difference for the better in my city. So that's what drew me into politics. And to the second part of your question of what do we do to bring more people on board, you know, it's a challenging time to be in politics. You know, there's a bit of an irony that for all of the, you know, strong emotions and outrage that we're seeing in politics, at the same time we're also seeing a great deal of apathy, and it's very difficult to recruit good people to run for office. What I see, you know, at the ground level is, you know, the ideologues, you know, they're very much throwing their hat in the ring and running for office, but you know, that ideological voice is good, but you kind of don't want them running stuff either. You know, it's really important to remind folks that, you know, if you want to make a difference in the world and, you know, draw on that sense of purpose, you know, you can do incredible things in public service. And you know, I think that, you know, what we can do to encourage the next generation, you know, we know that you're going to have to deal with a lot of headaches, and you know, in a previous generation, being an elected official instantly made you honorable. Now it makes you a target, sometimes even literally. So there are a lot of headaches that you have to put up with. But if you're willing to make those sacrifices and you get excited, you know, at the thought of making a real difference in your community and the world around us, you know, I'll tell you that, you know, having lived through it, those headaches are minor inconveniences, and this is really, you know, an amazing experience that I encourage everyone to explore.
So,
yeah.
First of all, good to see all of you. Thank you for putting on such a wonderful event. My getting into public service was a very distinct moment, at least on a full-time capacity. I had always played in politics on the side, been a part of campaigns and enjoyed it, but it was never my full commitment, my full-time gig. And it was 13 years into my career at American Express. And I said, I can envision the next 13 years at American Express and think about the day that I retire, I'm going to turn around and look at my career and say, what did I accomplish? Wow, I sold a lot of credit cards. And was that going to be fulfilling to me? right? And I said, at the same time, and in parallel to that, I looked at some of the leaders we had in our country and said, come on, we can do better than that. I should be able to try to get involved and do what I can. And then with respect to where to jump in, knowing that each platform has its different character, local, state, federal, that being able to have a platform that in my position with a global remit was one in which I could have literally hundreds of millions of people around the world in which I would be able to have an impact on international commerce and international trade. And so it was pretty easy to think as big and as grand as possible and say, if not me, then whom? And want to get in at the federal level. Now, with respect to the mentorship and piece, it has always been something that I have enjoyed doing personally. So whether it's through a formal structure of a mentorship program or what have you, just always turning around and being able to mentor and encourage the next generation to get involved. And now for me, it's a little bit of a different tune. Right before it was all these great business opportunities, startup, here's some VCs you can get introduced to, here's some cool deals you can get into. Now it is, wait a second, think about being in government, think about giving back to your community, to your state, to your country. And that's a little bit of a different tune for me able to do that with folks, but it is sometimes a question of when in life, when in career, but it is now pretty fundamental too. It should be a stop for all of us to get involved in public service in some way.
Totally agree. So I spent a lot of time in politics, 25 years, where it was always my day job. I ran campaigns, worked in government, and you talked about the challenges. I've never seen such a challenging political environment as what we're living in now. You know, we've got gridlock in Congress, we've got incredible polarization, political divisions, cultural divisions, social divisions, and we have incredibly passionate ideology on both sides. So given all of these challenges, let's throw in voter apathy, but given all these challenges, how do you, at the federal, state, and local level, actually make progress? Like, specifically, like, what can you do to actually get things done? And I'm going to start with Gabe.
Yeah. So I run the Office of International Trade, and we are promoting small business exporters to do as much as they can to drive the export economy. And even though that's a very tactical, very specific, one small business at a time, the questions that I get, whether it is in big forums like this, from the press, testifying in front of Congress, is what's your position on China, what's your position on supply chain, what's your position on inflation? So there are much bigger issues on which I'm asked to have an opinion. And yet when I know I can actually make a difference, it is one small business at a time, one constituent at a time. And where we can spend extra time making sure that our Latino community, other communities of colors are taken care of, that's what I think about. So it's very easy to get caught up in all the hubbub. I try to stay as laser focused as possible. Tell me about your business. What can we do to help you grow your business? What can we do to help you be a better exporter? And as long as you can, at least from our perspective, keep some of the chaos and the craziness out of it and know what you can actually affect and impact. And for us, that gets down to a very specific and individual small business. That's how I keep focused.
Jorge?
Yeah, I'm with Gabe on that. Focus on the challenges and the opportunities in front of you. But I also understand that, you know, my work is there's a larger context to it. And you know, even say 30 years ago, you know, the question that, you know, folks at the national level, representatives would ask themselves is, you know, is this good for my district? You don't hear that anymore. Now the question that you hear is my party for this or is my party against this? And that's challenging, but out of every challenge rises an opportunity. And while there is perennial gridlock in Washington, this is totally self-serving, by the way. But I think that there's, what we've also seen is a rise of local leadership. folks at the local level taking on, wading into national issues, sort of coordinating our messaging and amplifying the voice. It's a part of our system where we have a great deal of authority and responsibility devolved or delegated to the local level. And so, while the question in Congress might be, is my party for this or against this? That's not the case at the local level. At the local level, I'm sure you've all heard, there's no Republican or Democratic way to fill a pothole. You just get the work done. And as mayor, I shop in the local supermarkets. I get stopped by my constituents, and they're asking me, what are you doing about this? And so the currency of purchase in my world is still getting stuff done. And so you try to block out the nastiness, the partisanship, the sort of yelling and the ideology, and just focus on the challenges that you have in front of you. There are no shortage of challenges, that's for sure. But you're operating at a level where the level of attention, the level of innovation, ingenuity, and industry that you bring to an issue has a real direct impact on the world. If you get excited about that, I would say local government is right for you. And it might be the last place in our system where you can just focus on solutions, on getting stuff done. And so just focus on the task at hand.
Robert, at the state level, you just got a bad decision out of the Supreme Court today.
We did, and we're disappointed about that, but I think it reflects on the power of local governments to shape their own future. I always, as a former legislator and now the Secretary of State, you realize that state governments are still the melting pot and experimenting point for policies. And, we're going to keep butting our heads against the Supreme Court, because state rights, goes both ways, and we're going to keep exercising our right to legislate within our parameters. But one of the things that comes back to the core of the conversation with local governments and change and the way that we influence that is there still have to be some commonalities that bring us to the table that we can agree on. And that's where we try to live every day, because we know that on some issues, the sea might be too wide and the divide too large. But in areas like small businesses, right? And as the Department of State, we incorporate businesses and we license 39 professions. Everyone can agree that we want our small businesses to be successful. We want government to work so that you can start your business with less regulation. Okay, from that starting point, let's talk about how we do that. When we talk about some key principles, one of my legislative victories was around making sure that we had retirement savings available to everyone. That could be 401ks, for everyone, and making sure that's available to every part of the economic system, even if the state has to sponsor it, as they have in some other places. So we were able to agree that that was something that was important and something that both sides of the aisle could move forward. And then ultimately, everything is local. Everybody wants community development in some way, shape, or form in their neighborhoods. Whether it's focusing on rebuilding the downtowns across the state, that is probably one of the most widely accepted programs across the entire state of New York, our downtown revitalization initiative, because no matter where you are, whether it's a D or an R or a red or a blue, everybody wants a better downtown. And as a result, we get good buy-in on those. And I think those are the areas that significant change can be made. But also, you're reminding people that we do not have to be enemies when it comes to progress. Right. That there are still some things that we can talk about civilly and advance. And don't let the microphones of social media, drown out the ability to make progress, especially when there are communities like the Black and Brown and Latino and African American communities that really need the change so dramatically, and as a result of the lack of conversation, everything falls by the wayside and no progress happens. So I think that's some of the ways that we can move things forward for our collective communities.
That's great, thank you. So inflation is higher than it's been in the last 4 decades. Gas prices are way up, consumer confidence is way down, got supply chain issues. Obviously, the economy is a concern for everyone, right? But I think Latinos in particular have been disproportionately affected, particularly in the aftermath of the economic aftermath of the pandemic. So how in your individual roles are you addressing some of these issues to help mitigate the problem? I'll start with you, Jorge.
To help mitigate the issue. So part of the challenge that I think all of us as elected officials have is that we promise too much. We claim we're going to X, Y, Z, and we really don't have the power to. So understanding that there are limits to how much we can do. I'll say two things: one symbolic and one substantive. On the symbolic side, even if I can't help drive down inflation, help gas prices, et cetera, understanding that this is what residents care about and having them see that I'm focused doing whatever I can. Perhaps the impact at the end of the day is fairly minimal, but seeing that, that like I understand their situation and doing what I can, I think that goes a long way. The other piece on the substantive side is you have so much flexibility on how you want to approach these, how you want to address these issues at the local level. So one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, so my brand of politics is I am up for any kind of challenge so long as it's meaningful, right? It's the pointless fights that just want to make you want to tear your hair out. But I'm up for a good fight when it's meaningful. In the midst of the sanctuary city debate, right around 2015, 2016. So we leaned into it. My parents were undocumented immigrants. I grew up in an undocumented immigrant household. This is my people. This is my culture. And I believe we were one of, if not the first cities in the country to say, yeah, we're a sanctuary city. Fine, if you want to call us that, we stand up for, we protect our immigrants. And to boot, we're gonna give them IDs. There were about a couple of cities that had already had municipal ID programs, and so not only did we provide this tangible support for them, we also increased our financial support to organizations that serve these communities and did a bunch of different things. And so I think the point of all of that is that our residents, in spite of what we may say, they know that our reach is limited. They know that there's only so much that we can do. But knowing that they have someone that's looking out for them, someone who's going to fight for them and what they care about, goes a long way to making them feel included, right? Goes a long way to making them feel as though they belong. And so in some odd way, those intangibles turn into substance and they turn into real tangible things, which is really our task as elected officials. We want to bring people together, create a sense of community, make people feel that they're part of something. And so that's my approach, even when I can't substantively control inflation, gases, et cetera. I want people to know that their mayor has their back and their mayor's going to fight for them.
Yeah. Robert?
Yeah, so coming out of the pandemic, thank you to the federal government, because as a result of their actions, in a time of crisis, the state has been able to mobilize in a number of different ways to provide significant pandemic relief to support our small business community through grants, so not loans, $800 million that we put into place there, emergency rental assistance programs, over $1.5 billion to go towards supporting folks to stay in their homes, as well as almost $2 billion for wages and wage relief for undocumented New Yorkers. So we've been able to address a lot of those issues and concerns, but really it comes back to the core issue of being accountable to our constituents and put forward policies that help deal with today, with the issues that we're feeling and experiencing every single day in the middle of the crisis. And I think that's the power of elected office. That's the power of having representation that looks like you, that is in that room, you know, or on that floor in the legislature or in that place in government to make sure that those particular issues are being heard, right? And I think what, you know, having been in those rooms, you know, not as Secretary of State, but as a legislator, you know, many of those programs came to fruition because people rolled up their sleeves and said, we have to act. We don't have the time or the luxury to say no to people, and this is going to devastate our communities in such a significant way that the lack of action will literally, you know, you will see Midtown as a ghost town, and, you know, main streets will be abandoned. And it wasn't an exaggeration here in New York, you know, a city in particular. It was, you know, very real, and I think it was that call to action and response, and really that advocacy, because the money didn't come till just this, you know, to this year. It was a promise. We got, you know, CARES first, and, you know, and that came towards the latter part of last year, and then, you know, the ability to kind of exhale, you know, in the early part of this year before we moved into our budget cycle. So, you know, being able to take those dollars and really move them into the communities mattered, but it also gave us, you know, a little bit of time to gear up the programs that are able to do that. And more importantly, to build additional ones, because we're moving into our second wave of support as we come out of the pandemic. And I think that's been the important part of the Hochul administration, and making sure that we met our responsibility to deal with those federal funds and get them to the people who need it as quickly as possible.
Speaking of federal
So
funds.
I'm going to pivot off of that federally, because we could not have been more on the front line relative to COVID relief than the SBA. So the SBA does about $40 billion a year normally in loan guarantees and loan-related opportunities for small businesses. We went from $40 billion to $1.3 trillion.
Wow.
This is the PPP loans, the EIDL loans, all these loans that were related to COVID, 1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion, by the way, is the size of the entire Mexican economy. 1.3 trillion, 40 billion to 1.3 trillion. And we had to build this on the fly. Right, so that's, in terms of being on the front line, what we're doing for the community. It couldn't be any more front line than the SBA. The second thing relative to representation is, and this is not of my doing, but I'm a part of it, the administrator of the SBA, Isabella Guzman, Latina. Highest ranking Latina in the cabinet, in the government. The head of government contracting at the SBA, Latina. The head of entrepreneurial development at the SBA, Latino. The head of disaster relief at the SBA, Latino. The head of Office of International Trade at the SBA, Latino. And it is the first time in my career that it has been that heavily Latino and diverse overall amongst the direct reports of our administrator, the cabinet secretary. And it is an absolutely amazing experience. And out of it, just on this idea of representation, what do you get? You get a Latino small business going like, I would never have called the SBA, pero si este cuate is gonna answer the phone, let's do it, right? So, and so you get a whole new set of constituents that are willing to engage, and that's representation.
That's great. That's really great. Yeah. Okay, so the Latino electorate is very diverse, and it is increasingly more and more powerful, right? I mean, leaders from both parties are like dissecting and analyzing how they're gonna vote, how to court them, all of that. So, two-part question. How do we leverage that power, first of all? And then second of all, to what extent is the electorate now being served by our current systems? Let's talk about leveraging the power. Jorge, let's go to you first.
So, two kind of strands of thought. The first is, you know, I see it at the very local level. You know, we all have hopes and dreams, and we use, you know, we use the tools at our disposal to make them a reality. And you know, in Providence, we have a lot of community groups They put together their toy drives, they put together their vaccination clinics, they do the whole host of things. I'm sure you see them in every community. And for many immigrants, they don't have connections to the corporate sponsors. They can't just call a CEO and ask for sponsorship, and they don't have those kinds of connections, and so their connections are with elected officials. And so I understand why they get so involved and so engaged. This is a two-way relationship. Yes, it works for the politicians to have their support, but it works for them as well. And I give them a great deal of credit for understanding the landscape and seeing how they can promote the issues that they believe improves the community with the tools that they have. However, one end result, the end result of that is that so many folks in my community, in our community, they align themselves with politicians, not necessarily because the politician is promoting the right policies, citywide, community-wide, statewide, but sometimes because of that personal relationship. And that's something that we really have to mature as a community. We have to move beyond. That it can't simply be, yeah, I know this guy, he's a good guy. It has to be, come on, what's your position on this issue? And can I count on you to vote or act the right way? And so I think that's an ongoing effort, and we need to make sure that we're making the right demands at a policy level for our electeds. I also see at a higher sort of, and even national level, yeah, we do amplify each other's voice at a national level, but I can't help but feel as though the Latino vote is still taken for granted. And look, I don't want to. Look, I'm a Democrat, and I hope that the tide turns more in this direction. And so I don't want to be counterproductive with this, but suppose Democrats do take the House, Congress, Senate, and more state governorships. What good does it do us if they're not actually then pursuing the policies that we want as a community? And there has to be a change at that level as well. What the right levers are, I don't fully know and understand, but I don't want the Democratic Party taking our community and our vote for granted. They have to sit down, have genuine conversations, and understand the needs, the demands, and make commitments that then they're going to be held accountable for. And if not, then we as a community, we can't be part of this ideological sorting either. We're Latino, so we're Democrat. We need to evaluate candidates on their merits, and that means on the policies they propose.
Gabe, how do we leverage our power?
Perhaps this is the finance part of me or the statistics part of me, but we're 60 million plus. And so the larger our population gets, the more we are going to become representative of the underlying population in its totality, right? So it's every day that goes by, the more we simply have a super broad diversity of political positions, policy positions, and so forth. So therefore, and this has always been the discussion every cycle, which is, what is the Latino vote? Well, there's never going to be one Latino vote. And so for any party or any group of interest, you have to go issue by issue. You can't just assume there is some overarching, well, Latinos think this way, so let's just say X, or it's just this party or that party. So it means the effort needs to be more local, more organized, and by issue. And I think for either party or any interest group, you have to be that specific. You can't just be, oh, I think Latinos are going to do X and assume everything's the case.
Right.
And as you know, even amongst Latinos, the different ways our communities of Mexicanos, Cubanos, Puerto Ricans, etc., there's different things that resonate within our community specifically. So it forces everybody to be that much more specific, that much more local, and that much more policy by policy.
Robert, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so hard
Right.
for people externally to understand the Latino population and the vote and the electorate. You know, and I can't tell you how many podcasts, and Maria also talks about it frequently, you know, because the code has not been unlocked, you know. And part of it is because as a community, we're moving, we're migrating as a Puerto Rican, you know, a second generation. We have migrated. We are not just New York City. We are now in the middle of Nebraska, all over, without the level of concentrations that have clearly translated into political power as the previous generation. So now we are in small towns across America trying to figure out how do we make sure our voice is heard. So to the second part of the question, do I think our communities are hearing us, or that either party is hearing us? Not so much, because of this question of, I have to talk to them, you know, to our community about what the issue is in their place. What's happening in Miami is different than what's happening in New York, is definitely different than what's happening, you know, in Texas. But the Latinos there are invested in their community. Like, that's one of the things that brings us back to our common threads. We want to be part of our community. We want to feel safe and feel like there is community around us. A perfect example, Syracuse, New York, 8,000 Puerto Ricans have recently moved there in the last census, and there is a growing connection between that community and the city of Syracuse. But how do we talk to them about their issues? How do we turn that into political engagement? And thankfully, there's some community groups who are having that conversation, and we run the Office of New Americans so that we help facilitate that discourse and dialogue. But that's something that certainly needs to happen nationally and be embraced by both parties, because you're not going to have one answer for everyone, but there is a consistent need to communicate with us. And I think we have to, you know, in our respective roles, wherever we are, figure out how we build those tools in place for that active dialogue. And that's what I'm excited about as Secretary of State. So,
That's great.
thank you.
Okay, well, we don't have a lot of time, but we do want to take some questions from the audience. So, right there. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. It's interesting you started with the lack of or abundance of apathy in young professionals, because personally, I am really trying to make that transition from the corporate sector into the public sector. And it's something that I related to a lot when you were talking about that sense of purpose and achieving that through helping your community. So my question is, as a young professional or mid-career professional, anyone who wants to make that transition from private to public sector, short of running for office, you will not see me on Telemundo
Why not?
yet.
Why not?
Just yet. But yeah, I'm really interested in your advice on all that and how to find your niche, because public policy is huge. You have local, state, federal. So how can you navigate that from the ground up?
If I can jump in just on one thing, and I know I pushed you a little bit on why not run for elected office. I think there's a lot of cases where people say, well, no, that could never be me. The parallel that I've spent a lot of time on in just helping people get into graduate school, business school in my case, is you get a lot of people who say, I'm not even going to apply because they would never accept me. Well, if we don't stop counting ourselves out before we even get to the point where our application or our opportunity is being judged by an external party, then we're doing ourselves a disservice as a community. Now, there's a million reasons why you and your life circumstances, that might not be at this moment the time to do it, but I would never count it out of the opportunity set at some point in your life. And maybe the pathway is appointed office first, or working for a public policy think tank, or being a volunteer on a campaign. But someday, if elected office is even remotely in your dreams, there is a journey for that, and so don't count it out from the outset.
So if I could just
We love this
say
question.
the exact same thing, just in a slightly different way. So first of all, you seem amazing. For every one of you, there are 10 mediocre dudes out there.
White dude. White dude.
You said that. Just like biding their time, just waiting for their moment because they're destined for this. The second thing that I just want to double click on what Gabe said is you don't have to jump into running for office right away. That's like a hell of a leap. But you can get appointed to a board. That brings you into this into this community. You start having conversations, building relationships, and I guarantee you, you spend enough time in these rooms, and you'll start saying to yourself,
I could do that.
him? I can absolutely do this.
I could do that.
Well, just to be even more blunt, I'm recruiting. And we should all be recruiting wherever we are. And we can meet you where you're at. So and my call to action is we have to do something now. And if it's not elected office, we should be figuring out how we can support our next generation. And that's either getting involved with a nonprofit, serving on a nonprofit board, help fundraising, put your capital to work, mentor somebody, give them the space and the opportunity to eventually run for office. There are so many different ways that we can take an immediate action to help support either someone else who is running for office or to get the experience and build the tool set that lets you eventually do that. It's an evolution. We're all evolving in our processes, and when you leave the corporate world, you might choose public, and then you go back to the private world and just become a philanthropic slash big campaign donor. Either way, there's a place for everybody in this room, and there are some great people. So I'm going to do a little shout out for networking. You've got Council for Urban Professionals, New America Alliances, organizations that help both mentor and provide the toolkits for folks like me and folks like you to get involved in any one of those ways and eventually run. So it must be you. Just to be even more blunt, it must be you. It will not be someone else, and we have to support that every way that we can. Thank you.
Yes, yes. One more question.
Hi, thank you so much. On that same note, I currently work at Meta, and what inspires me every day is that I can impact billions of people around the world. Next year, I'll be getting an MBA and an MPA, Master's in Public Administration, at Harvard and Stanford. So I am torn between serving public sector or returning to the corporate world, just for that mere fact of how much of an impact you can make, sometimes now with technology, as we've heard about today, or through venture capital and media. So what do you think is the call for specifically the public sector if I want to represent my community and make a really lasting impact and change on society for Latinos?
Who wants to take it?
Well, as you said, which one are you doing your MBA at? And the MPA is at the Kennedy School? So there's no one template, right? And for somebody who's doing both MBA and Kennedy School, it suggests you want to do both, right? and so the question is simply in what sequence and at what time in your life and your career. One example that's very common, and it's my case, is I had a 20-plus year corporate career. And then at the point in my life in which I said I have the time, resources, and energy to do something in public service, so there's this sequential one. Other people start government and make that their career and use MBA skills to be a more effective government operator. But it is fairly common to have people who say, I will go make money, I will go contribute in an MBA business corporate career capacity, and then at some point, typically when you've had some seniority in your career, be able to parallel into government. And whether that's in a career position or a political position, that's where you have more options further down in your career. That is just one of many different paths, and it happened to be mine, so I'm happy to chat with you more about it if you want it.
Or you can do the crazy thing like me and do them both at the same time. which some of these positions are part-time positions and allow you to pursue your corporate functions at the same time, depending on what level of government you're pursuing. So there are, to that point, a lot of different choices and options to be able to pursue both of those things at the same time. got a lot of A-type people here, so I know that, you know, that may appeal to many of us as well.
Yeah, and yeah, again, as they've both mentioned, so I'm in my 8th year now as mayor. I have 6 months left, and I'm going to go back into what I was doing before. You know, I feel excited about these last 6 months, but also life on the other side looks pretty good too. And when I get to that other side, I can tell you how I'll feel, because I already feel this way. I feel, you know, I have done my public service. You know, I've taken one for the team. I've loved it, but I've done my public service. I may or may not run again, but I think the point is that, you know, you can't see yourself as, I am now a politician. It's a career choice that you're making for a certain period of time, but it's not a rest of your life choice. And there'll come a time where it will make more sense than not to do this. And then the last, I guess, bit of wisdom I can impart is, usually if you ask a young person the thing that they most regret in life, they'll almost always tell you that they regret something that they did. And if you ask a person in the later stages of their lives what they most regret, they'll almost always tell you something that they regret. And you don't want to regret, you know, big things.
Okay. Sadly, we have run out of time and I'm getting the hook. So I'm going to end where I started, which is public service is a noble and great thing to do at any point in your career. And so I want to thank you all for your service and for being here today. Thank you so much.